Hi, so welcome back. This one's from my own collection. This is Bloodsport by Dick Francis. So, for no particular reason, this is the first of Dick Francis's novels that I have read. As someone who loves horses and mysteries, you'd think I'd have got my hands on one of these ages ago, but I had this one, Bloodsport from 1967, in my stash for a while, and I finally got around to reading it. This copy is a first edition, and I love the beautiful line drawing of the horses on the cover. It's got like this lovely sense of fluid movement, and the girl in the bikini with a gun is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of fun, it's kind of amusing. It's a bit James Bond kind of thing. Inside the front dust jacket, no less a luminary than Bing Crosby endorsed this book when it came out, saying it was very exciting. And he'd know he was also in the horse sort of racing business. In this book, Gene Hawkins is a secret agent and as handsome as he is bitter after his longtime girlfriend and love of his life has left him. While out on his boss's boat, he's asked to look into a priceless racehorse that's gone missing, and he's drawn into the case when the horse's owner is involved in an accident that Gene suspects is actually an attempted murder. From London to the US, on the mysterious trail of the racehorse, this crime is just the tip of the iceberg. Dick Francis is the name that Richard Stanley Francis wrote under. He was born in Wales and his father was a stable manager and jockey, which led to Dick Francis leaving school at 15, becoming a famous jockey and trainer himself. After serving in World War II, he had a successful career as a steeplechase rider and won, I think, over 350 races. He became champion jockey of the British National Hunt. In 1945, he met Mary Margaret Brenchley, and they described their relationship as love at first sight. They were from different walks of life, is the impression that I get, and their families didn't really approve. Brenchley had a degree in French and English. She worked as a stage manager, a publisher's reader, and also as a pilot. And they had 2 children together and had a very long, happy marriage. In 1956, he was riding for the Queen Mother on her horse Devon Lock in the Grand National, and he and his horse fell, which is when he retired, kind of at the Queen Mother's suggestion because he was getting injured a lot. She was concerned about his safety, basically. So at this point, he turned to writing, both as a novelist and a journalist, initially with a best-selling biography, and then into fiction. Richard Stanley, throughout his life, credited the books to him and his wife as a team, stating that he would have been happy to have both their names on the book covers, but publishers weren't really into that at the time. So he used the name Dick after one of her family members and Francis as his or their own last name. So it's kind of an amalgamation of the two. Mary sounds like a wonderful person and a little bit of a character, with a lot of the research and editing being down to her. Richard wrote what he knew. Injuries and recovery were based on his own experience. Leading men were often jockeys or worked in the racing industry or that kind of thing. Really informed the story worlds that he created. And then his wife would be the sounding board for the plot and character development and the editing as well. She did a lot of editing. But perhaps most importantly, she went out and tried the careers and things that were included in the books for research so that they would feel really realistic and sort of detailed. So generally, Richard would sit down to start a book in January and sort of get a draft down on paper, and then Mary would start a new vocation as something like a pilot or a photographer or something like that. And I love that. I think that's so fun. It kind of makes me think of the couple in The Mummy, where they both kind of are interesting people in their own right. Over the course of his, or I guess his and her career, they wrote over 40 books, most of which were bestsellers. Generally, the books are set in the racing world or adjacent to in some way. The lead character is always a man, although his job can be anything from artist, investigator, to jockey or wine merchant. And this character is always the narrator of the story. In the process of the thriller plot, the character often has to find himself or grow as a person in some way. Finding the outcome of the story is not just solving the thing or finding the MacGuffin, but it's also his own sort of personal salvation or deep growth in some way. The books are almost all standalone, although a few times the lead character does return. In tone, when I was reading this one, it reminded me a bit of Ellery Queen mysteries or Ian Fleming's Bond novels, which were printed in the same era, in that there's an element of heightened reality here. The lead character is a little bit better than a real life person, a little bit, you know, a bit more handsome, a bit more heroic, a bit more charming, that kind of thing. And the stories are adventurous, entertaining, a little bit aspirational, rather than overly sort of gritty or going for too much realism. They're also genre fiction, so while they feel original and you definitely know you're reading a Dick Francis novel, you don't get sort of major twists on the genre, that kind of thing, which is nice because you sort of get what you pay for, if you know what I mean. You get what it says on the tin kind of thing. But that said, they're definitely less pulpy and higher quality than Ellery Queen, which were often written by ghostwriters for the pulp paperback market. And these are a bit more grounded in their setting than, say, like Fleming novels. But I mean, that's kind of a digression. That's a story for another time. And yeah, they were also written over a much longer time period. So later novels, reflect the changing times and readership expectations, as you would expect. So starting in 1962, novels came out all the way up to 2010, with some of the last novels being written alongside Dick Francis's son, Felix. And then more recently, like I think up until 2022, there were books written under the sort of Dick Francis name by Felix Francis, which reminds me a little bit of the way V.C. Andrews sort of has the V.C. Andrews like brand name on it, even though most of those books are ghostwritten. But there's only a few that have been written by Felix Francis. So Dick Francis novels have won many awards. They've been adapted into movies, miniseries, TV series. They were optioned in 2022 for a TV series as well, so you may kind of hear the name come up at some point soon. And they've also been adapted into things like radio plays and even 2 PC games as well. So that's Dick Francis. That's who he is and his story. So this book is Bloodsport. This is one of the earlier books coming out in 1967, as I kind of mentioned before. And it's not a thick book. It's fairly slim. And it opens with a man reaching for a gun under his pillow. And from there, it sort of moves pretty steadily. It's really well paced. In the initial setup, as we meet Gene, we learn he's not doing well emotionally. He's been dumped by the woman he loves, who he was in a long-term sort of situationship with, and he's really depressed and feeling quite hopeless over it. He feels like his life is meaningless and not worth living, and I found that the way the book talks about this is really interesting for the time period, because it talks about depression and it describes it as a disease and one that people feel in different ways, and its causes can be different from, loss or being disappointed in life, or in one woman's case in this book, it kind of comes from not having a career and interests, which is quite forward thinking for the 60s. It's quite emotionally mature and empathetic about the whole thing, really. I was kind of impressed. I mean, for the time period, maybe by modern standards, not as much, but that sort of aged better than you would expect for a book of this era. The case that is presented to Gene helps him get interested in life again over the course of the book. And I kind of get the impression that his boss's hope when he engaged him in the case was sort of that it would bring him out of himself. But it's not oversimplified, or it's not like sort of making light of what he's going through or anything like that. Gene, as our lead, is kind of cool and edgy. He's sort of jaded and suffering with ennui. He has a gun and he likes to drive fast. He sums people up very quickly. And yet this never kind of goes too far into becoming sort of comical or anything like that. He cares about people and he just feels well-rounded and likable as a character. All the characters in this book feel well-rounded and like they have quite realistic feelings and motivations. Which is great because the novel's not that thick and there are female characters, which sometimes in books of this era are not always as well drawn as the male characters, shall we say. One thing that was very 60s or old-fashioned, or however you want to put it, in this book was the 17-year-old boss's daughter. She gets kind of ogled a bit by older guys, which feels like par for the course at the time. And yet Gene is very aware that he shouldn't do this. She's 17, he's 40, and it's made really clear that she's too young and sort of naive, and that's kind of acknowledged. I kept expecting this book to cross the line on that, especially as the girl hero worships Gene a little bit and he's attracted to her, kind of like there's this kind of weird thing, but he never really takes advantage. I just found it interesting because it's reading it, it's a bit weird by today's standards for sure. And yet it clearly makes the point that even in 1967, people kind of knew this sort of wasn't really okay. You know, this kind of 40-year-old hitting on a teenager. And so he doesn't really hit on her and nothing really happens. It's more played for the fact that all ages of women in this book are really into Gene, but he's not over his ex. So it's sort of a bit of a male fantasy, perhaps, I guess. Of course, this book is also a horse book, and I loved that it was accurate and had a little horse and racing industry details. But for a non-horse person, this will never bore you like I bore my non-horse loving friends with too much detail. It puts things in a way that's easy to follow and adds to the realism of the story's world, making the racing industry sort of exotic and exciting and rich with a hint of escapism and that kind of thing. But all of it is in service of the plot, and I thought this was really good. There's an element of mystery here where we have a bit of a whodunit, who stole this horse kind of thing, and then the curiosity of the why done it, because there's some kind of scam going on here in this book, and it's quite an interesting idea. So I really like this whole part because when you put the pieces together, the puzzle just gets bigger, and I just think that really was a great, I don't know, the plot was just good in this book. So all in all, I liked this book, and I'll probably pick up more by Dick Francis. So let me know if you have any titles of his that you particularly want to recommend. It's not a long or a heavy read, and yet the effortlessness of the storytelling belies the thoughtful character design and arcs and the interesting researched plot. It's an entertaining ride, pun intended, and at the end, I thought this is a bit like Hardy Boys or maybe Boys Own vibes a little bit, but for adults. And I mean that in a good way. It could be sort of the escapist reading that you've been looking for. Once again, thank you for joining me. Subscribe to be notified of my next video if you want to join me, and hit like if you liked this so that I know you liked it. And I will chat to you guys in the comment section.